Recording in progress.
Recording in progress. Thank you, Yanni. And yeah, and it is my pleasure to extend a very warm welcome to you all. We're just going to open our session with a karakia to ground us in this space this morning and bring us all together. So I thought I would share our ministry karakia, which speaks to nurturing the um, the rangatira of tomorrow, the leaders of the future. So I think it's an appropriate one to start us off with this morning. Ka hikatia, hiki hikatia. Whakarewa ki rongarawa, e ria kia kore e hoki whakamuri mai. Pua atu te pūmanawa Māori, e mana tikanga, e te uri o Maia, popoia ngā mokopuna, ngā rangatira mō āpopo. Ka tihe mauri ora. Right, so this is our first of three sessions that Yanni has very kindly offered to do with us, doing some PLD for our trained BAS assessors. And today's focus is going to be a literacy focus. So lots of you gave some feedback about, what's happening in your space, what would be useful for you right now. So we had some great suggestions, and literacy was something that came up a lot. And so the two main questions that Yanni is going to address or focus on today will be what is the role of structured literacy program when a bilingual assessment reveals that a student needs support with basic literacy in English? And when the bilingual assessment, when the student is, when it is a bilingual assessment for a young learner in around year 2 or 3, what would you recommend to support students writing? So that's going to be the beginning of our webinar series, if you like. So the little bit of housekeeping. We're going to Yanni will take the first sort of 45 minutes to address those two questions, and then we will absolutely leave some time, and Yanni and I, we're on strict timekeeping, leave some time for some Q&A at the end. So the last 15 minutes will be a chance for some Q&A. If you have some questions that occur to you as we go, but you're welcome to put them in the chat. Probably we will address those at the end, though, rather than I think Yanni would prefer to sort of say what she'd like to say, and then we'll address some questions at the end. There'll also be a chance for you to unmute at the end and ask your questions. Can you just ask you to keep your mics on mute while Yanni is talking, because it can be sometimes those background bells that ring halfway through a session can be a little bit distracting. So I am going to, I don't think Yanni needs a great deal of introduction to you all. All of you will know how integral she is to our work with the Bilingual Assessment Service. But I just want to welcome you, Yanni, and to say thank you so much for your time and your expertise, and just to acknowledge what you bring to this space and what an important part of the service you are. So anyway, I'm not going to talk anymore. I'm going to mute myself. Welcome to you, Yanni, and to everybody here. And let's. Oh yes. Oh, and I meant to mention the recording. That was my one other thing on my to-do list, was we are going to record the session. Primarily as a resource for those of you who are attending. Yanni will share the link after the session, as well as a skeleton set of slides for you to have as a resource if you would like to go back and look. Just to acknowledge that this these sessions are for people who have done the bilingual assessment training. We are aware that there are clusters who need more bilingual assessors trained, and we will be looking at that in the second half of the year. But please keep this for you rather than sharing generally with those who would like to be trained. It is important for the integrity of the service that people do go through the process of training before they are using these resources. So so we will share the recording with you, absolutely, but it is primarily as a resource for you to just to sort of re-listen to bits that you might want to go back and just hear a second time. Okay, right, Jannie, over to you. I shall
Kia ora,
I shall mute myself.
and kia ora koutou, in my language. Nā hui mohe Irene, and welcome. I'm just aware that there are 36 people on board now, and the registration was for 50, and I'm afraid that when I'm getting started, I might not admit. So Kirsty, if you can find any way of admitting someone, or if you have a colleague that isn't here yet, and you can communicate with them if they're coming, you might want to warn them that, I don't know how I'll quite do it. I'll have to try. If there's an admit that comes up, I'll just have to try. So welcome. It's a pleasure and always a little bit tense-making to present to you. So you in the south and you in the north and you in all the places between. Sometime or other, I think I've been face-to-face with you. So that's always a wonderful thing that we've known each other physically, personally, but now I'm online. So there were two questions that have cropped up, one with a little bit of a focus around structured literacy, and I'm going to explore that. That's probably the biggest component of what I'll share today. And then with young learners that have had a BA with one of you or with you, and you want to make some recommendations around writing, what would that look like? So I've got a set of slides, and I'll have to time myself because there are now, I can't see it. Hold on. I practiced this and now I can't see it. I don't see it. Let's try again. Share. Here it is. And I'm going to go to the slide deck. So I don't know whether I'll be able to get going with anyone that's admit, but I'll just start. Okay, so can you see the screen clearly? Good, thanks for the thumbs up. All right, so one key question that has arisen is what is the role of structured literacy program when a bilingual assessment reveals a student needs support with basic literacy in English? So what I want to alert you to, of course, is you've got a whole range of expertise, and I don't in any way purport to be, the expert over and above you. But I think what I want to bring to this morning is a discussion around, what is a priority if you're making a recommendation after a BA about the basic literacy needs of a student that you've assessed. And we're thinking English at this point. So let's just think, I had that, where is that question? Oh, there's the question. So let's just think about what is structured literacy, and if we had time, I'd bring you into the discussion. But there are a whole range of ways of explaining and explaining structured literacy. And those of us who've been educators in the system for a long time and have been engaged in language learning with students at all the various ages and stages, we probably have been, doing structured literacy all our teaching time. But there is also a narrow view of what structured literacy is. So at the big view level, it's systematic and sequential knowledge about how language works and is used. I have a little bit of a problem with both those words because language learning is a messy affair. And while we purport to be systematic and definitely explicit, it's not at all always sequential. And so learners are individual in the way that they acquire English, although we do follow a number of stages, hence that we've got the English language learning progressions as a guide for that developmental progress that we see students go through from being new learners of English to getting towards, more competent L2 or 3 in all the modes of English language. So, why isn't it clicking? So what's on the web? And there's a lot on the web. So I just uplifted a couple of excerpts from the International Dyslexic Association. You might think, well, that's weird. Why did I go there? But it was just sort of on top. And if you look there, again, it's that really broad view that it's, yes, explicit. We should be explicit. It's always been part of my practice across the modes. And it's focused at the phonological, at the print level, at the meaning level, and it's at the very different layers of text. If we take discourse as the many layers of text. In that same document, there are some moments in the document where they take a focus on English language learners. And you will be interested, I think, to be thinking about, I'm asking the question, what do you prioritize in your recommendations? And if you look on the left-hand box there, we know if you're working with English language learners, as I am every single day, that vocabulary acquisition is central to everything that progresses them almost everything that progresses them in terms of their language growth. And so, again, if we're thinking about structured literacy in that narrow sense of phoneme, grapheme, or onset and rhyme, then we need to ask ourselves, is that a major priority? Because it is very easy to put students on those kinds of programs, whatever one that you would pick, and there are a whole range of them now, rather than step back and make recommendations to the school and to the teachers that are working with a particular student that in fact there are majorly other priorities, rather than being too focused at the word, phoneme, grapheme level. And I want to explore that with you. So just to recall, phonological, it's how words are spoken, what they sound like, what they then transfer to in terms of the English writing system. And we have 44 phonemes and about 80 plus different ways that we can write those phonemes. So that's a very complex and tricky area. And then this is at the heart of the matter because language is a meaning carrying tool, semantic tool. And so the most important thing as we work and make recommendations with learners that we need to be focused on text meaning making. And if we're not careful, we lose sight of that as we have students on very time absorbing and energy absorbing programs that don't address the big picture. So I want to get us to think about again that what we majorly need to be doing with newer learners of English or ALP 1, 2 is to continue to build their mental repertoire of language. And one major tool, of course, is that we engage in conversational teaching and learning. My computer's just decided to make a really weird noise. And that's really important. That one recommendation is that the students that you have bilingual assessed is involved in engaging interaction with text, because that mental repertoire in the head offers that student vocabulary, notions and content and knowledge, the language structure, and the realization that language is primarily a way of communicating. So again, what to prioritize? Firstly, a priority recommendation is that what's the quantity and quality of engagement in spoken and reading text, but especially spoken text, so that they build a mental repertoire. But of course, literacy is very critical to building that mental repertoire too. So then if we look at knowledge of language as it is written, both reading and writing, they need all those, that we know that about, what we bring to reading is the extent of our vocabulary, what we already know about the topic in hand, our knowledge of language structure, and that written text is also hopefully a logical way of communicating meaning. And then, of course, part of that has to be at the phoneme, grapheme, letter, word group level, and then ascending up again. So I'm having click problems. So then I'm asking that question again, what to prioritize? So I just want to take you again, you're experts in language and in learning and lots of other things in your lives as educators, but your particular focus as RTLBs. But if you even distill down to this, rather simple major component parts, spoken English, we might take for granted, is easy to acquire, and social communicative English is in a certain sense. But the prosody, the rhythm and the speed of language and how you pronounce it, if you're working with new learners of English, you'll realize how difficult that is to acquire. So that's no simple area of development for students. And again, with an increasing digital classrooms that our students are in, I'm afraid that we might have quite a lot of slippage, especially beyond the young years, in the extent of quality and quantity of talk in the classroom. So how do students then engage in quality spoken English language, whether they're listening or speaking or in conversational mode? And then when you look at reading, of course, there's a whole raft of component parts that you need to bring together as a reader, not least of which is, of course, phoneme grapheme transfer. But more than that is, that high frequency automaticity, the fluency of word grouping, just overall, we just relentlessly focus on vocabulary and work that I do in my classroom and understanding text knowledge and its construction. And then again with writing, trying to write, and you've got to generate an idea, but you've also got to somehow transfer that into words and somehow get that down. So it is about what's my big mental repertoire of language, or from a teaching point of view, or from a recommendation point of view after a BA, what do we want to have built most solidly for the student? And I would say that while we can look at, phoneme to grapheme, whether you're doing sort of the Joy Alcott Catch Up Your Code or whatever other alphabetic code program there is, or if you want to, do another focus on at the word level and syllabification. Again, asking ourselves as people who have conducted a BA and what the recommendation priorities are, whether these are the top priorities when I've shown you that, the complexity of text involves these kinds of things. So already I'm running out of time. I was going to get you to listen to a couple of pieces of text to let you realize that if I can play this, I'm not sure if you will hear it.
When Captain Hook got
Can you hear
eaten
that?
by a cruel crocodile, Starkey was voted captain, which made everybody smile because Starkey was a skipper who'd give you lots of rum. And if you were sad at leaving home, he'd let you take your mum. He only had one arm, one leg, one ear, and one.
So what's the point of my sharing? What's the PowerPoint? I can't find out. So what's the point of that? Just, thinking about this is not New Zealand English, it's British English, but the speed and the pronunciation. And you might think, but I know plenty of learners that within 1.5 years, 2 years, they can communicate socially and in English language. But if we then look at, extending their repertoire of being able to understand English. I'm just going to play you this one, but move it along a little.
You might have had a hard day, and yes, we do have hard days in television, but if you're a new immigrant,
sometimes it's not what you say. Where are you going with this?
But you use that word. That word.
Something naked.
It was too spicy actually. I hope that's a little bit, yeah.
Why is that?
Sorry.
I'm not sure what you're talking about.
After that meal, are you feeling knackered?
Yes, a little bit, yeah.
Why is that?
It was too spicy actually. I hope that's what you mean.
You talked something naked. I understood that word.
Something naked?
Yeah, you talked, I think that.
No, nothing naked.
But you talked.
Hey, where are you going with this?
But you used that word. But you used that.
I didn't use it.
All right, so what's the point is that actually English language acquisition in the classrooms, and especially now as we have more and more speakers of other languages whose accents are different in English and who don't slow down their talk in the classroom. Even when I'm in there, I'm thinking, I don't understand what you've said, that the acquisition of English, spoken English, is more fraught, more challenging than one might assume. So what's the point? The point that I'm trying to make is that building the mental spoken repertoire of a student that you've done a BA with towards their literacy, you're trying to address is a really critical priority. And then when we look at reading, again, if we're not careful, we're tempted to do it at the word level when in actual fact, the points in the yellow box are really top priority. So if we look at, this is, rather, I think, a little bit old now, but it's just totally relevant from the International Reading Association. Some people allocate large amounts of time to teaching how to phonemic awareness tasks. No longitudinal study supports the effective practice increasing the reading achievement when they reach intermediate grades. Now, that's not to say that it does not have its place, but you can read there, print rich, speaking rich, surrounded. We know that it's not necessarily at all just because you're surrounded. So that's maybe to be, examined. But that students are very focused in language activities, that yes, that you are explicit in looking at the trickiness of phoneme, grapheme, but that your priority is to understand text. We must keep in mind that it is success in learning to read that is our goal. And I wanted to just illustrate that. So here's it depends age and stage, but here's a not too complex text. Millions of different kinds of animals live on the earth. I can't see that little bit there, but I'm going to leave that for you to read. Rather short sentences and not too complex from a word attention point of view, but it actually is very complex in that there are many concepts that are really worthy exploring and roll through the text. So again, what's important to focus on, and I'm saying these three, actually. So you could go through any number of visuals that relate to that text from, large and where they live and all of that. And you've got rich pickings to talk about and build the students' knowledge, vocabulary, structure related to that. If you were to then pay attention to some of the words, and so you take the word million and you were to look at it and break it up into its sound, the letters and their sounds, is that helpful at the big picture? Is it a priority? Or you divide it into the syllables. Is that helpful? From a certain extent it is, because if they can't say the word and pronounce the word, or they're reading it and they don't know what it is, that's very important. But let's just be realistic about this. If you look at the eyes alone, so we have mil, eon, e, and then you have kind. So you've got three different sounds for the I just in that one word, the one little piece of text, that sentence. And so in my trialing of being too grapheme focused in my classroom, this becomes really confusing. When you can address the differing sounds much more readily as you work with text. That's not to say that I'm not suggesting that we focus on unpacking words from a phoneme, grapheme point of view, from a syllabic point of view, because as students get more and more involved in complex text, there are more and more multisyllabic words. But again, I'm being quite cautionary here and saying that deep diving into the text is a critical priority recommendation I'm putting to you. So to build text fluency, and of course that does involve being able to pronounce words, which then involves phoneme, grapheme, or in spoken language, building text comprehension, hence those visuals, and also then what each word group and sentence is telling us. What can we extract that we know now because of the meaning making of those words, and then at the larger text level to then retrieve that we have actually had a meaning making encounter with text. So one of the things that we do lots with our students, whether they're newer learners of English or not, is that we pay attention to word groups and how words collocate or keep company together. And that is a major influence on how the students become fluent in reading, because you will know plenty of students who still continue to read word by word. The old idea that we used to say they're good at barking at print, but actually, unless we break text into words that keep company together, or collocations or word groups, we can't gather meaning from them. And so we do a lot of that, and the students become very adept at being able to break at word group collocation points. We don't use those big flash words, or you just say words that keep company together where there feels like a natural break. And I don't get too grammatical about that, because you could, but we don't. And so as they practice this, they become more and more confident to be able to do this with text. And that then builds their fluency. So that's not, I'm running already over time for this question. That's not to say, and anyone that knows me for a long time ago, which I know is Jennifer there in the room, but a long time ago, 30 plus years, I developed baseline English, and I'd like to think, well, I was in the structured literacy game way back then, recognizing that we need to pay attention to the patterns in vocabulary, or at the digraph, at consonant blend, at the vowel blend level, for students to be able to see that there are patterns, that it's not a non-patterning language, it's got plenty of patterns, and then also to have mileage with high frequency vocabulary, and then you can see there's a lot of visuality. And so building a lot of oral spoken text and eventually print text. So this is my grandniece that I have now stopped spending time working with her, but for 1.5 years I would work with her once a week, and we used baseline English. And I'm not here to promote baseline English, but one of the things that you can see is that there is high level of visuality, participation, and focus on this one in a vowel blend of EE. But vocabulary that you can hear and see is a really major focus. I don't know if one of these is no, it's not a video. So again, what's the point? My point is saying, what are you going to do in your recommendations around literacy to do with reading? So my grandniece Sophia was quite severely behind by the time she was 6, going on to 7, and she was fearful of print. She had quite a she's a rather sort of reserved kind of girl, but once you open her up, she has quite a good vocabulary, where she had age and stage and still does, but she was scared of print, both to read it and to write it. So, you know, this is how simple we started, that the text was a co-construction, but it was that simple. And using the stimulus of the baseline English, gradually, till she became confident to be able to write what words she felt she could write, mostly the highest frequency vocabulary, and then gradually this was mostly her writing. And so she has made amazing progress now. She's much older, but this is the approach that I can say honestly worked for her. I'm going to skip this, but here she is, sweet Sophia, showing her knowledge of the vocabulary matching the visuals. And for some of these, but we were looking at the consonant blend of and here is she's reading a co-constructed text.
Wait, Dorothy, and walk. Dorothy is black, and Waffles is orange, and Dorothy is fierce and
So, you know, you'd be thinking, oh, this isn't this the Sylvia Ashton Warner approach? Well, in some ways, you know, when you've got a student whether I work a lot with older students and we co-construct text all the time. That doesn't mean that it's a sort of a babyish thing to do. It is not. But it's very empowering because they are participant using the language that they've got at the cutting edge, but we're the massagers, we're the scaffolders. That doesn't mean that we don't focus as we go along the way in very small pieces of word patterning, as you can see there, where those words on the left are what she identified as her words that she knew with S and the sound S, and then we kind of co-constructed that little text. So I want to focus again on, so this text was one that I was just using in the classroom a year or so ago, and we were trying to meaning make this text, and for some of the students this was more challenging than for others. But you can see in this messy whiteboard, I use whiteboard all the time, you can see that there's attention to patterning, meaning making, and you might think, how did anyone make sense about this, Jannie? Can't you do more tidy board work? But it started blank, and as we went along, we were recording on the whiteboard what was occurring. So there's little you know, family focus, word family focuses. There's meaning making, not assuming that they know what these words mean. And somewhere along there, I thought I didn't, but in the next one, you will see this was a co-constructed little text from them, but we also did a little breakout to look at words and these were with very new learners of English at the secondary level, based on an Aesop's tale that we were reading. So my priority is that a focus at the word phoneme graphing level is within the bigger picture of language acquisition, rather than being tempted to recommend that they go on a program for that at that word level, onset rhyme or whatever it is, when in fact the major focus needs to be on text meaning. And so you can see that with some of the board work too, that looking a little bit at the, when you have a vowel, consonant, vowel, or consonant, vowel, consonant, and how that sounds differently. But also a lot of meaning making, but also little breakouts. So I don't know if I'm making sense and I'm running out of time, but what I'm trying to do is make the point.
And we have a few minutes at the end. You can either go back and touch on some points you feel want a bit more explaining, or we can move on. So, shall we open the floor to either just unmute and talk? They could be comments or questions or things you're hearing, seeing. Or pop your question in the chat if you would prefer.
There are some comments in the chat, so I don't want to look at those. I can see. I can see it. No one has any comments or questions or no?
Around structured literacy and how to work with your schools.
I just wanted to say, Jannie, I totally agree with what you've said, and it's really reassuring to see that and to hear that, to convince myself, I think, because we've gone down that how important structured literacy is. However, we certainly know with a lot of our learning support students and ESOL students, etc., it's really, really tricky, and sometimes it just has to be about the words and meaning.
And if you are constantly working with students, as I am every single day, gosh, just the trickiness of word after word after word. And so I know in comparison to sort of trying to do because I, really admire the work that Joy Alcott's done. But if she bases her catch up your code on, it has to be built on the student's oral language. So the words that they know that they can nominate towards a particular phoneme that might be written in a particular way. But when you're working with English language learners, they just don't have that extent of vocabulary. And so while, I think Joy would be, more than happy that if you actually end up nominating a lot of words yourselves because they don't know them, it isn't really where the rubber hits the road. And all the time, why is it like that and why isn't it like that? And if you start to go down a rabbit hole of clarification, you can see the glazed eyes. And, what we're trying to say is, no, in this one, and yes, you can do a phonological explanation, but just so many tricky. I mean, if you want to explore that, you just look at the OU and, the 13 different sounds that the OU has. And if you want to really mind boggle your students, you will do a specific focus on OU, and they won't be any the wiser necessarily. So thanks for your comment, Natalie.
I have a question. Jannie, hi, this is Gretchen Gulick.
Yeah.
I'm up in Whangarei, and I'm right in the middle of doing a bilingual assessment with a youngster with the Malayalam language. And he's only been in the country for a year and a half. He's young. He's 7 years old. He's never been exposed to any English prior to that, except for those shared English Malayalam words that they use, in context with their own language. And I'm just doing the English portion of the assessment with him. And I guess I'm asking, he seems to speak in 1 to 2 to 3 word sentences in both his first language and English. And he has a good grasp of concepts, some really good foundational things. Like, where would you, and I don't know, I haven't seen the delivery of his literacy program in the classroom. I'm still doing those observations and unpacking that. Like, where would you suggest that you start with a learner like that, as if I'm giving you enough information?
Well, obviously 1.5 years, and at that critical point when he probably has low to no literacy in his own language, is that risk point 4 to 7, when they haven't got they're not establishing their literacy in the strongest language. And I don't know if you're alerting to that, but whether the bilingual assessment context didn't allow him to be much more fluent in his first language. It seems that, only 2 to 3 word utterances is quite minimal for a native speaker of a language.
Right, right. Yeah. I mean, he's also a COVID child. And so his history has indicated that he didn't have a lot of formal schooling in India. And so that might be a factor too. In terms of, like I said, concepts, identifying pictures and food, all that kind of stuff he can identify, but it's the language structure that he's not appears to be weak.
So I would be asking firstly of you and your assessment elements that you explored. When you did the stage 2 and you were exploring his strongest language, did you get him to, other than conversational exchanges with the bilingual support person and using the record of oral language in his first written language, you explore that you had a number of visuals and you invited him to speak and show how clever he is at saying ideas?
Yes, I have. And actually, I've recorded. It's really been helpful to record my sessions so I can go back and re-listen to and really unpack the interaction that they have together. But I am actually going to redo that because I want to emphasize a little bit more better with the bilingual support person to clarify more in depth about how he's responding to their conversation. So I want to redo that to see if that is there, that conversation, because it's really seems to be like that's small, 1 to 2 to 3 words used in exchange in those conversations, even with the interview.
So in all my work that I've done around, talking matters in the first 1,000 days of a child's life and then subsequent to that, the family and the main caregivers' quantity and quality of spoken interaction, and then if you're bringing in print text or not, is critical factor affecting their transition, that child's transition into print. And, this can be really variable. And again, as you say, COVID could be a factor affecting, or it could be that he did or didn't have, we've got some students, the ones that we're using as exemplars. One, for example, the family were in Ecuador on the streets, and the levels of talk and with the family members and with the children was really minimal in a sense, because the family was under such stress. So there are all sorts of conditions that could be that child may not have had what we optimally would say is the quantity and quality of conversational interaction with his main caregivers, or they may have changed. And then he's in that invidious position of coming to New Zealand and needing to acquire and build a strong mental repertoire, which is what I showed you earlier, which includes a strong spoken English, if you can, and then somehow transfer that from, and I have to see his first language written. But one of the things that I'm preparing now, and another resource that I'm doing as a trainer package, is to alert people that if the language of the child and the family, both spoken but particularly written, is very distant, because languages are on a language map, you know, all the more challenging it is for this boy to acquire this language called English. I suspect that it would be some kind of Cyrillic print. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know what that means. Sorry.
Well, so it doesn't look alphabetic.
Oh, absolutely not. No, no. And he has no exposure to that. We exposed him to the alphabet and really beginning emergent little readers, and yeah, he didn't respond at all. So we knew that he does not have command at all of that, and it's really quite complicated. To compound this, I don't need to elaborate unless other people have other questions, but to compound this particular case is that we're looking at a possible neurodiversity, but and what that looks like with a child with English language and behavior issues, where there's a lot of inattentiveness and hyperactivity involved. And so I'm trying to unpack that as well. And I will include that in recommendations
sorry to interrupt, but I want to alert you to being very cautionary about labeling, neurodiversity.
Totally.
One case study, if some of you were really long time ago trained, you will have remembered Kevin that I used as that exemplar. And he described what seems similarly, to what you're describing, and that, socially inept, unable to concentrate, quite disruptive behavior. Yet in the bilingual assessment, he was so focused. And, and all of that, when it came out to really making some kind of insightful recommendations or revelations, I guess.
Yes.
Here's a boy who isn't anything else but a clever little boy who is just trapped within a world that he doesn't understand.
Yes.
And the pushback is to display behaviors that we would say are questionable, even disruptive, and then you start to ask. Now, there are students, and again, the exemplars that we've got for the trainer package are, one of those students is definitely got a language cognitive hiccup, but that's because she was hard of hearing right from the time she was a little child and never had that diagnosed. And that affected her uptake, as you can imagine, because language is brain shaping. But again, we don't label very easily like that, because just scaffolders and believers that she can learn, and she is learning, but that doesn't mean that her cognitive confusion, it crops up every day, but she unwrangles it and we help her unwrangle it, and she's learning. So my recommendation, cutting to the chase, would be that for that boy, I would say I developed a junior years program called Bring Back the Magic, and its focus is really on hands-on real materials, oral language development, accompanied with print that arises as you are working with that child. Now, these days, this is not normal practice, unfortunately, but there are large numbers of students that's what they need, because how do we develop our first language strength is because we're highly involved in the real world and tangible materials where there's a really skilled scaffolder working to make meaning with that child, with real things, and then slowly doing what I've already shown you in the baseline English, expanding that and extracting it out into something called print. then that child just needs miles and miles and miles of that. Way back then, well, when reading recovery, and we had so many students who were quite new learners of English being put on reading recovery, and I put 2 or 3 major statements out saying that this was an inappropriate. They are not deficit. They are not at risk. They just need language building. And this is not an easy, remember, we have to remember that 3 to 5 is a minimal number of years to be able to in any way really acquire a new language with any kind of meaningful strength.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you're saying. And I think the more I'm working with this child, the more that I'm leaning more towards this idea of a child trapped in a world that he doesn't understand, because he is catching on, and is intelligent, and he has shown improvement over the last course of 6 months. He's just still struggling, with that support. So I'm excited about being positive, and not being treading very lightly with the neurodiversity, and maybe even not even going there.
I'm more than willing to share the final report that I wrote on Kevin with you in particular, which then can't be passed on.
Yeah.
But I think you'll see, because it has in it, if I'm not sure if it's within the document, or I'll
I might have it.
The referral concern was, so negative and so behavioral and so everything. And yet the outcome of the bilingual assessor showed a completely different boy. Now, I know we've only got 4 minutes left, so if you just indicate, as Kirsty has already said, that if people want to follow up, they can communicate with me. I mean, as long as, how long is a piece of string? I will try and respond to you if you have specific questions. But if you want to email me, or email me via Kirsty, I will try and support you in your, in your journey with this particular boy.
Thank you so much. Gosh, it's just been a pleasure, and I've learned so much. I'm so excited about using the things that you've just talked about in my report and recommendations.
Kirsty, we've only got 4 minutes left, but
we have.
can go
Now,
over
Alice,
people got 5 more minutes.
Alice is just wondering, is Bring Back the Magic still around, Jannie?
Well,
Can you still get a
I had a
copy?
question from a principal whose school just completely embraced it, and she's now principal advisor. And I said yes, but I think people don't know about it anymore. So yes, it is. If someone was to ask me, could I work with a school, I would love to. But it's certainly, it's not a simple thing, because to be able to have wonderful learning and language acquisition with young children. So this school was a school in Wellington that completely embraced it, and what a difference in language acquisition for all these students in the years 1 to 3, because they embrace Bring Back the Magic. Yeah.
But it's not so much maybe a resource you can buy as a book or something.
No,
Jannie?
because it's
Okay.
the way you deliver it, and
okay.
need to work with the school on that, or the junior area. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I am mindful that we, people have sort of penciled in an hour, and as Jannie said, we're very happy to stay on for the next 10 minutes if you have a particular question you'd like to talk to Jannie about. But I will just close us off and wrap us up here, because I am also aware that people have penciled in this time and will have other bits and pieces, obviously, to carry on with. So
just before that, Kirsty,
yes.
If in the chat you want to just say whether this has been a valuable session or not, that would be helpful, I think. As the presenter, it's always a bit, well, you take the risk and you share. And I hope that you've all had something that's a series or some takeaways from today. But if you want to make a comment, it's less about, being grateful. It's more about, have you been able to extract something useful from today's session? Sorry, Kirsty.
No, absolutely. So, I mean, maybe one thing you could put in the chat is your key takeaway that or an aha moment that you might have had as you were listening, or something that's come back to you that from your training that you sort of think, oh yes, that was a good reminder, that was a good connection to make. So maybe just as we're finishing off, you could put that in. And Jannie has your details from your registration, so she will be able to send you some slides and a link to the recording. Jannie, that's correct. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
so
And yep.
it takes me, you won't get it instantly because I need to then get the recording downloaded, and then I'll probably have to do a little bit of editing on it, not much. And then I have to get it up onto YouTube and then make that available. I think Kirsty and I talked about that it'll be available for a certain period of time and then it'll be taken down. And again, under the condition that this really isn't for anyone else unless you've attended it, this is for you. Right? And the same with the slide deck. There'll be selected slides, but that will be available. And I know all of you are very respectful of copyright, and it's not for further sharing. It's for you, for your reference. I'm not sure what slides I'll select. If you have particular ones that you want to indicate, to me would be ones worthwhile having. I'll try to pick out the nuts and bolts of what I think I've shown you that might be useful. And sorry I wasn't able to really get to the second question, but there's a lot of relevancy to the second question and the first. Right, so from me, thank you for coming. And for your wonderful work. It is, over the last 1.5 years, I've been working with the ministry to get the trainer package ready, and I've done bilingual assessments. And again, it's just kind of like, what a privilege it is, and how complex it is, and what a responsibility it is. And it's wonderful work. So keep it up. And, we're here to support you. So just remember that. Ka kite.
Thanks, Jannie. Lovely. Lovely. And I will just finish us with a